Randy, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time to do this. I know it's a little late, so I really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy campaign schedule and your daily life schedule to come on here onto Flor Unmuted. Before we take a deep dive on your campaign and all of how it's going, for the listeners who don't know you or haven't met you, tell us who Randy Villegas is and what you're up against.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you so much for having me, Flor. Thank you for using your platform, to inform our communities and for everything you do. A little bit about myself. I'm Dr. Randy Villegas, but you can call me Randy, just like I tell all my students. First and foremost, I am the son of my parents, immigrants who came to this country, who made lots of sacrifices to give myself and my siblings a better opportunity. Both my parents came from Mexico, my dad from Michoacan, my mom from Guerrero. And, I was the first in my family kind of born in this country. And so growing up, that motivated a lot of what I did. I grew up in a working class family. And so every weekend, I grew up working at the swap meet, getting up at 6 a.m. to go work on Sundays. And then later working at my family's auto repair shop, which today I'm an owner of. And I was the first in my family to, go to college and university at Bakersfield College, CSU Bakersfield. And then, by the grace of God, I ended up getting a full ride fellowship to UC Santa Cruz to get my PhD. And so I knew my heart was always back in the Valley. And to be honest with you, I even thought about why isn't there a UC Bakersfield? Why can't I do my PhD here in the Valley, right? And ultimately, I went to school, but around the midpoint, I think when COVID hit and devastated so many of our families, I lost my grandmother to COVID. I thought about dropping out of my program. I thought about, maybe I'll find a full-time job somewhere else and be able to help my family make ends meet. Because unfortunately, our family auto shop was struggling, right? People weren't traveling because of COVID. People weren't getting their cars fixed. And so I thought about dropping out. Thankfully, there was a 1-year temporary political science professor position at this community college, College of the Sequoias. I was fairly young at the time. I was 25 years old, so I didn't think I would get it, right? I had some experience TAing, but, I knew I had to shoot my shot. I gave it my all, and thankfully, I got the job. And then the following year, I reapplied for a more permanent position and got it again. And so for the last 5 years or so, this is my 6th year teaching. I've been a professor of political science at College of the Sequoias. I'm also on the Visalia Unified School Board of Trustees. It'll be 5 years this December. So I've been fighting for students and working families my whole life, and I'm ready to continue this fight in Congress because the very same programs I grew up on, like Medicaid, SNAP, and WIC, are all programs that are being cut because Congressman Valadeo thinks it's more important to give tax breaks to his corporate sponsors and to billionaires in this country. And so, for far too long, the Central Valley has been left behind by politicians who care more about power than people and who are more interested in catering to corporations and special interests than our own communities. And so that's why I made the decision to run for Congress, and I'm running for California District 22, which includes parts of Kern, Tulare, Kings, and if redistricting goes through, we'll also include parts of West Fresno County. So that's a little bit about myself in a nutshell,
Yeah.
and happy to answer.
No, that's awesome. You talk about, your parents being immigrants to this country and being from Mexico and stuff. And I think a lot of Central Valley people who are now working families can relate to that. And I think it's good to see a candidate like you run, because it's so relatable. And then another thing that you mentioned was, coming back to the Central Valley. I think that it's such a unique characteristic that when I meet somebody that decided to come back home and improve things here is admirable. I have a friend who actually went to Berkeley and now she's an emergency medicine attending at Clovis in Fresno to choose to come back and serve the Central Valley when she could have gone anywhere. It's so admirable to see and be able to connect to you and people who choose to come back to the Central Valley. And so I think that's an admirable trait that as far as I've been watching your campaign has been something that's been incredibly relatable.
So it's something I tell all my students is that we need more boomerangs than less shot putters. And the way I kind of explain that metaphor is, a shot putter throws their discus or their object, as far as they can, and they kind of land in one spot and they stay there. And instead, I tell my students, you need to be boomerangs, right? Go out there, yes, get that education or the life experience or the job experience, even if it's here in the Valley, right? But then come back to the Central Valley and make this a better place, right? Otherwise, we continue to suffer from the same kind of failed leadership that we've seen across the Central Valley and in our communities.
What made you decide to run for Congress as a Central Valley native?
Yeah, I will definitely say there's a couple of moments. I would say after the last November election in 2024, and seeing the results and seeing, people's reaction, I think, to knowing what was to come and what we're seeing in this moment with ICE agents kidnapping people off the streets in full mask, and refusing to identify themselves. But I would also say it was this big BS budget that Valadeo voted for, right? That's going to cut Medicaid by $880 billion. It's going to cut programs like SNAP and WIC, programs that I grew up on and wouldn't be here without today. I needed free and reduced school lunches and breakfasts in order to focus in class. My mother was one of the 40,000 women in this district who relied on WIC to make sure she had baby formula for myself and for my siblings. And so knowing that all these programs are being cut and that children in the Central Valley are going to have worse opportunities than I did, it's something I just couldn't stand by and watch. And so I, was really active in a lot of the protests. Valadeo signed on to several letters saying that he wasn't going to vote for this final bill if it, cut Medicaid in any way, and he lied straight to our faces.
Yeah.
He betrayed our community, voting for it multiple times after saying that he wouldn't. And so I think the Central Valley deserves better than somebody who's going to sell us out to billionaires in this country. It's going to sell us out to his corporate sponsors. And I think it's time that we have actual representation in the Valley. It's going to fight for working families, because for many of our families, these decisions aren't just politics. These decisions are literally life and death. And so we need somebody who's going to be fighting like our lives depend on it, because here in the Central Valley, they do.
Yeah, absolutely. Cuts to healthcare, Medicaid, Medicare, very urgent, very, top of mind issues, especially in the Central Valley. I think, there were so many charts that were put out there by influencers and platforms that aren't even from the Central Valley, saying that over 50% of the constituents in Valadeo's district take Medicaid and Medicare. And this idea that, he signed on to a letter to the Speaker of the House urging them not to cut Medicaid, because this isn't the first time that he publicly will say things like, I'm not voting to cut that, and then does. It's so blatant, and it's taking advantage of voters in the Central Valley who aren't really, they're hard at work. Not only do you vote against your constituents that elected you, but you're also lying, putting out this political cover letter saying, hey, Speaker Johnson, don't cut Medicaid. This political cover, it's a joke. You've made it very clear you're not taking any corporate PAC money. You're not taking those high dollar donors, because of the obvious political exchange that comes with it. But I want to know, what is your core message of your campaign that you want voters to hear and hold loud and clear?
Yeah, and I think our campaign's message is so related to that, right? If you saw our first kind of professional ad that we put together, it starts with the same dicho that my mother would tell me growing up, which is "Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres," which translated to English means "Tell me who you're with, and I'll tell you who you are." And I think the exact same thing can be said about politics. Tell me who you're taking money from, and I'll tell you who you're actually working for, right? It's a shame that so many elected officials, so many candidates sell their souls to these corporations, to these corporate PACs, who ultimately they're working for, to billionaires who they're working for, right? Valadeo isn't representing our Valley residents or Valley communities. He's representing his corporate sponsors and his billionaires who will put him in office. Elon Musk, who spent almost $1 million to help him get elected last cycle. He doesn't care that our farm workers are struggling, that the teachers are struggling, that our working class families are struggling every day because of his tariffs and the prices that we're seeing in grocery stores, because of his cuts to Medicaid. And you mentioned earlier, over 50%. We actually have more Medicaid recipients here in this district than anywhere else across the country. 2 out of every 3 constituents relies on Medicaid here in the district. And so for him to vote against our communities to cut Medicaid so that he can go give Elon Musk a tax break so he can go buy another private island or yacht or whatever billionaires spend their money on, it's just completely ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
our
Yeah.
message is to say that we're here to fight for working class families when it comes to the economy, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education. And let's talk about healthcare for a second, right? Because I think this is also something that distinguishes our campaign from anyone else in this race. I would have probably voted no against this big BS budget. And I think one of our top priorities should be reversing these cuts that are happening in this big BS bill. Let's talk about the reality of where we are even before these cuts, right? The fact is, 2 out of every 3 bankruptcies in this country are tied to medical debt. Again, 2 out of every 3 bankruptcies are tied to medical debt. It's not millennials buying avocado toast or people buying things they can't afford. 2 out of every 3 is tied to medical debt. Every year in this country, over 60,000 people die because they don't have health insurance or because they're underinsured. Not because we couldn't treat them, not because we couldn't save them, but because of a system that actually denied them care. And so that's why I'm a proud supporter of Medicare for all and universal health care, because nobody should have to worry about going hundreds of thousands of dollars into debt in order to get the care that they need. Nobody should have to be fighting cancer and their congressman at the same time. Valley fever, diabetes, cancer, all these diseases don't care who you voted for in 2024. They don't care what your party registration is. But we know that everybody gets sick, which is why we need health care for all. And I also think it's important to address even more than that, because we need to ensure that people have the care that they need, especially when it comes to vision and dental, which gets out of the conversation so many times. I don't know about you, but so many people in the Central Valley that I know will drive, including my parents, will drive 7 hours to Tijuana to go get their dental work done because it's cheaper, even with insurance.
We have daily lives. We all go to work. We all pay, we all go to work. Some of us go to only get health insurance, right? We need to understand as middle class working families is we want people to be able to go to the doctor when they're symptomatic, right? I don't want you to then go to the doctor when, you're a diabetic and your foot has to get amputated because it's more costly. That's what drives up healthcare premiums. Providers actually are the ones that are notorious for using the wrong billing code, for overcharging on medical visits, for saying that they've spent X amount of time with certain patients. Those are the actual drivers of these high healthcare costs. Those discussions need to be had because I think a lot of Central Valley voters think voting for Republicans is going to drive costs down because of taxes. That's not how healthcare premiums work. And we need to stop having to hold down a job to get healthcare.
Yeah, I think, you don't know how many people I've talked to in my own life who, sometimes will say like, I hate my job, my boss is terrible, blah, 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 but I won't leave. Why? Because of the healthcare, because of my dependents, because your healthcare is tied to your job. How
Right.
is that freedom in the richest country in the history of the world, right? And to your point, I mean, there's so many things we can do, right? The fact that we pay more for prescription drugs than any other country on earth is ridiculous. You mentioned folks who are diabetic, right? People here in the United States sometimes ration their insulin because they can't afford it. If you drive across the border to Canada right now and you stop at the first pharmacy you see, you can buy that vial of insulin for a maximum of $35. That here in the United States, if you don't have insurance, especially, is going to cost you hundreds, if not thousands of dollars over the course of your lifetime. And
Yeah.
Congressman Valadao voted against capping the price of insulin at
Yeah.
$35.
Yeah.
It's these
And
same politicians
yeah.
who take money from big pharma that are never going to fight for us in that area because
Right.
they're afraid they're going to lose their campaign contributions.
Right, exactly. And I also want to add that in that big beautiful bill, or whatever big BS bill, I like that. It also contained $170 billion to ICE. So like the second part of that is like he's taking insurance from our parents who are getting older, who need insulin, who are, dependent on these services, and he's giving it to ICE. He voted to give it to ICE to drag our parents out of their cars and into detention centers. I mean, That is absolutely awful. And as a sitting congressman, for as long as he's been in that seat, he knew what he was doing. Every time I see a video on my feed of a woman getting dragged out of their car, I don't care that it's in Chicago, I don't care that it's anywhere else. I know that my congressman voted in favor of that to happen. And he didn't show up when the government shutdown happened either. There were empty seats all across the side of where Republicans sit, and he was not there. He was absent. And that's another waste of our tax dollars as well. And like I said, as a young family, a taxpayer, somebody who works in public service, that just cannot continue to happen. There was a recent article that regarding Dr. Baines, and I'll read you the headline. It says, "She's a Central Valley doctor. Why did lawmakers skip California votes on pesticide bills?" And the article goes into talking a little bit about how farm workers are a little bit, confused as to why this member has skipped out on bills related to toxic pesticides and other chemicals. Notably, some environmental groups have said, it's stunning to hear the way that a doctor is voting on things like this. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I will say it's very disappointing to say the least, right? And particularly there's three votes which I'd like to kind of discuss. One of these bills was actually proposed to have stronger reporting requirements for pesticides, especially when they're sprayed near schools where all of our children learn and play. And she did not support that bill. There was another bill to ban DEHP, a carcinogen or cancer-causing agent. She did not support that bill either. And, earlier we were talking about some of these ice raids that are devastating our communities and the country as a whole, where you have ICE agents who are refusing to identify themselves, who are fully masked. California Democrats proposed a law to, hold them accountable, to actually unmask them, to require them to identify themselves. And she did not support that bill either. And so I don't know how you can claim that you're going to fight for families in the Central Valley in DC if you can't do that right now in this moment. I think it's very egregious. Our farm workers suffer from some of the worst conditions when it comes to, working in heat. I think they're 37 times more likely to experience a fatality from heat exhaustion or from heat stroke, in addition to having to, make contact and breathe in sometimes these toxic pesticides, etc. Why would you not support our Central Valley? Why would you not support our farm workers to have safer working conditions? Why would you not have stronger reporting requirements for pesticides sprayed near schools where our children learn and play? And we come back to what my mother taught me. Again, con quien andas y te diré quién eres. We take a look at what are some of the corporations that helped her get into office, that lobbied against these bills, as that article notes, that lobbied heavily against these bills. And she decided to not vote, right? Which in Sacramento, I think most folks acknowledge is just a polite way of saying no, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's shameful. I very proudly would have voted for every single one of those bills. And I think we need to do more to hold corporations accountable when they pollute our environment, when they pollute our communities and our workers. And we need somebody who's going to be fighting for the health and working opportunities of all of our constituents here in the Central Valley. So it was disappointing to say the least, but unfortunately not surprising.
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
about a list of 53 corporate PACs that have given to both my Republican and my Democratic opponent in this race. Many of those corporations are at the root of many of the issues that we experience. Chevron and ExxonMobil, United Health, who I think wanted to use AI algorithms to deny more people's claims. And, so many of these corporations that are at the root of the issues that our working families are facing every day. So that's why I'm proud to be the only candidate in this race who's not taking any corporate PAC money, because I want to be accountable to our communities and not these corporations.
Yeah, absolutely. You talk about those parallels with the 53 donors that were, the same that donated to David Valadao. That's alarming. That is definitely raising a lot of flags, I think, with a lot of my, close friends and family members. That actually brings me to the next thing, which I think you know what I'm going to ask you now, is the article that came out about her accusing you of political violence for putting out this ad that stated facts, that was corroborated by, obviously it's all public record. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, well, first off, I'm glad there were journalists who asked questions because I think in several of her posts or wherever, she was accusing me of political violence. She'd also implied that I had lied in some sort of way. And when asked for comments, I don't think she responded because, as you stated, all of these things are public record. All of these things are facts, right? And I would never lie to our communities and our constituents, especially the people that I hope to represent, right? But I think especially in this moment, to accuse our campaign or me of political violence is outrageous, right? Let's talk about the real political violence that's happening in this country right now, right? Let's talk about the political violence that's happening for many of their corporate sponsors who are at the root of so many of our issues, whether it's BlackRock and these private corporations trying to buy up entire neighborhoods and force people to become renters, whether it's corporations that want to continue to pollute our environment and our air, and our communities suffer the worst from those outcomes and the highest rates of asthma and among the highest rates of cancer in California and throughout the country. Let's talk about the real political violence that's happening right now in this moment, and let's address that, right? And I don't want to minimize the real threats of political violence that elected officials are facing. That I've gotten death threats myself, and I don't want to minimize that. But to accuse somebody of political violence for stating facts and for actually telling the truth, I think really does a disservice to the real violence that's going on in this country that we have to address. And that violence is not coming from working class families. That violence is not coming from young families who are trying to get by. That kind of violence is coming from the folks who don't want us to have health care, who don't want us to have high quality education, who don't want us to have housing across this country. That, in my opinion, is where the real political violence is happening. And we have to fight back against that.
Yeah. That brings me to another point. Recently the state legislature brought a vote up for ACA 8, which is essentially the redistricting Prop 50, which we're hearing a lot about. But at the state legislature, obviously that needed to pass. And I noticed that Jasmeet Bains is the other Democrat on this ticket, was the only Democrat to vote against the redistricting that was being proposed for the November ballot. And she voted alongside Republicans. There were no other Democrats. She was the sole Democrat. How do you feel about Prop 50?
Absolutely. I am a definite supporter of Proposition 50. I think we need to be using every tool possible to fight back against this administration. And I think Proposition 50 isn't just about California, it's about the country and whether we have fair and free elections in 2026 and beyond. So it's very disappointing to see, my opponent vote against this bill and vote alongside Republicans, right? I heard some people say that, if, because we're running for Congress, then maybe it would have been some kind of conflict of interest. Well, if that's the case, then why not abstain and provide a reason for that?
Right.
She didn't. She actually voted with Republicans to stop Proposition 50 from going into effect. We can't stand on the sidelines as Donald Trump tries to rig our democracy, as he tries to rig our elections, right? Again, we need fighters in this moment who are willing to meet the moment and do everything we can in Congress. I have heard from so many people that they are tired of seeing Democrats and Democratic leadership write strongly worded letters as an act of resistance, and that's it, right? We need people who are going to meet the moment and use every tool possible to stop this administration and everything they're doing.
At the end of the day, it kind of comes down to what are we going to do to stop this administration from continuing to rob our grandmas off the street? How is that ever going to end? She skipped out on the pesticides, so I'm not sure why she couldn't skip out on that. But anyway, voters deserve to hear not just about your platform, but how you'll stand in a race that's gotten pretty heated. We know that gaining name recognition is one of the bigger hurdles when running for office across the board. What's your strategy to break through the noise and make sure voters see you as a serious alternative?
Yeah, we need to meet people where they're at. And I mean that in multiple ways. I mean that physically and literally meeting people at churches, at swap meets, in the community, so they can get to know our campaign, but also working to expand the electorate, right? On paper, if you ask any political scientist, any political pundit, and you just show them the numbers of this district, it is a Democratic majority seat. It's a Latino majority seat, the most Latino district in California. And yet we have a Republican in office, right? And we know historically this district suffers from low voter turnout. People don't turn out to vote as often as they do in other districts across the state and across the country. And so not only do we need to talk to voters, right, who vote in every election, but we actually need to expand the electorate, especially young people, right? The median age of this district is just 30 years old. And we need candidates who are actually going to speak to the issues that young people are facing in the Central Valley, from the high cost of living to the challenges of buying a first-time home when you're competing against a BlackRock or private corporation trying to buy up the home that you're trying to buy up, to also the extremely high cost of tuition at a four-year university, and the fact that we don't even have a four-year public university in Tulare or Kings counties, right? It's ridiculous. And so our plan is multifaceted. Not only are we going to meet people where they are at, in person, but also social media. We know especially that young people are on TikTok or on Facebook or on social media. And that's also where they get their news from, right? I ask my students where they get their news from. Very rarely do any of them read newspapers or even watch TV. It's all social media, right? And
Yeah.
so we need to meet people where they're at. We're also going to have a very aggressive field team and field campaign to make sure we're actually knocking on doors, talking to voters, phone banking, text banking, and doing everything we can to reach every voter across this district. Because usually campaigns only target what you call high propensity voters, the voters that they know are going to turn out, which typically lean a lot older, typically lean a lot more affluent, a lot more money, and kind of lean more conservative as well. And so we need to talk to those voters, yes, but we need to actually invest resources and put money where our mouth is. If we expect young people to turn out, if we expect our Latino community to turn out, we need to be actually investing the resources into getting those communities out to vote. And that's how we're going to do that on this campaign.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. I will say I really liked your most recent ad. I think that ad really hit a home run in this sort of, obviously you're up for a congressional seat. That's not an easy campaign whatsoever. And, the fact that you're also not taking corporate PAC money, you've been very vocal about it. And, you know, how has that been working for you in terms of being able to get your name out there?
Yeah, it's been great. The folks I've gone to meet across the district, I was just tabling at the Kern County Fair. Was it last week, I believe, or maybe the week before? And just meeting people where they're at. And people say, hey, I saw your ad, or I've seen you online, or actually, I ran into one of my former drumline students. I used to teach percussion and drumline at many different high schools and middle schools in Kern County. And I saw him. He had he'd been working for the sheriff's department for a few years. Now he's working at the schools. His name's Nico, and it was so great to see folks and to meet them where they're at. And so we've been seeing a really positive response, even from across the political spectrum. Republicans and independents who say, you know what, I maybe don't agree with you on every single issue, but I appreciate the fact that you're actually working for us and that you're
Yeah.
not working for these corporations and special interests, right? That means something to people when you can look them in the eye. It's I'm not working for these corporate PACs, McDonald's, Chevron, United Health, all these PACs that my opponents are taking money from, and saying that I'm working for you, right?
Right.
Whether that's our oil and gas workers, our teachers, our farmers, our farm workers, and everybody across this district who really makes the country thrive and our world
Yeah.
thrive.
Yeah. And for the folks who aren't necessarily attuned to the donations that a politician would get in a campaign like this, tell me a little bit about what it means to take millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars from corporate PACs for a candidate. What does that mean?
Yeah, legally speaking, I'm not a lawyer. I'll start with that as a disclaimer, right? Um,
Disclaimer.
Disclaimer, right? It's difficult to provide a direct line between, political contributions and influence. But people are not dumb, right? If you take $5,000, $10,000 from a corporation, a pesticide corporation, are you maybe going to skip that vote? If you take $5,000, $10,000 from McDonald's or from, one of these corporations that wants to keep the minimum wage low, is that going to influence the way that you vote when you get to Congress? I think most people would say yes, absolutely. And we see that money talks when it comes to these issues, right? I think that the California legislature is a good example of that, right? We have a supermajority in the state legislature right now. Democrats could pass any policy they wanted without any single Republican votes. And the Democratic Party platform says that we will fight for things like universal health care, college free tuition, but we don't have those things in California, at least not yet. Why? Because some of these Democrats will align themselves with Republicans and then vote to kill some of those very popular policies, right? So they don't go into effect. And coincidentally, those are often the very same Democrats that are taking the same corporate PAC money as Republicans. Again, dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres. I think it's important to have elected officials who are not beholden to corporations and to special interests, and they're accountable instead to our communities, right? And I'm proud to say that our campaign has seen so much momentum since launching. We are the top Democratic fundraising candidate, in this race. At this point, we have surpassed over $500,000 in campaign contributions from over 5,000 individual unique donors, which is amazing, right? Not a single
Yeah.
check from a corporate PAC.
Yeah.
Instead, we're powered by people. And I think
Yeah.
that really shows. And we've actually raised more than the previous challenger did in their previous cycles, despite the fact that we're not taking any corporate PAC money. So I think people are ready for change, not just in this community, but in this district and the country as a whole.
Yeah, yeah. And I saw your I saw a breakdown on your campaign page that it was like the average donation was like $60. And I think a lot of the time we tend to forget that like if we all put our $60 together, that actually makes a huge, huge impact over these million, billion-dollar corporations that truly need government to work with them so they can continue to get their CEO bonuses and their tax credits that overwhelmingly keep them in power. And I think people are starting to get that with this administration, but I won't go further there.
But you're,
So just to get it, yeah, just to get it a little bit more lighthearted, I will say it was really funny. So the friend that I told you about earlier, my friend who's a doctor, she lives in Fresno, and then so does my other childhood friend. And we were trying to come up with a place to take our annual trip, and we were messaging, and we don't have a lot of time, but they said we should go to Visalia. And I thought to myself, what in the world are we going to do in Visalia? Like last year we went to Napa, we've gone to Mexico. And this year they were like, we should go to Visalia. And they're both from Fresno. They're both from Fresno, and they were like, no, Flor, like Visalia has a really fun downtown and it's very walkable. And I was like, okay, I'm convinced I'll come to Visalia. And it was nice. It was a little less than an hour drive for me. It was 45 minutes for them. It was such a good middle point, and we stayed at this hotel, the Darling.
yeah.
Delicious food, by the way. Oh my God. We ate there the whole time we were there, except for like appetizer spots. But all that to ask you this question.
Mhm.
What's your favorite spot in downtown Visalia?
Yeah.
And you can say top three if you have top three, that works too.
Yeah, food wise, I would have to say pita kebab. It's just really, really good food. It's like, it's just delicious. I would also say there's this place called Cinnaholic downtown, which if
Okay.
you're gonna try it this time, definitely recommend you try it. It's like the Cinnabon place, but like I don't want to oversell it, but like 10 times better. It's like really good.
Really? Hey,
Yeah,
okay. I
Cinnabon.
love me a cinnamon roll.
Yes. But like not even just a cinnamon roll. They have different versions of like an Oreo flavored one, like a berry one. Like it's just yeah, super good.
Okay.
And then I'd probably say the Fox Theater, has a lot of great shows. Like my wife and I, and we're inviting, our families. We're gonna watch a mariachi group later this month, and so definitely lots of fun shows and things to do. I will say, like the Darling, when I first saw it, I was like, this is like the Padre, right? Like in Vegas.
Yes,
I was like,
exactly.
that
That's
was my first
exactly what I
thought.
thought.
That's just because I'm a Bakersfield boy at heart, and so anything that
Yeah.
I love.
That's exactly what I thought too. I was like, this is like the Padre. I mean, great. They had great atmosphere. They have a rooftop so you can like look at the sunset if you get a good
Right.
spot. They were yeah, the food was great. The food was delicious and we had a great time. We went to they have like a golf spot there, so we
Oh
went
yeah.
golfing a little bit and then we went to this sushi place that had this DJ there that was playing Selena and like that. That's kind of where we wrapped up the night. And
Love
I
it.
was like, hey, like Visalia is pretty cool. I was like, I should look for a house here. I kind of slept on Visalia all these years. I think I went there once when I was like 11 and then never went back. And yeah, they have really great coffee shops too. So if you're
Mhm.
in the Central Valley, here's my pitch to go check out downtown Visalia. Great people too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just like
yeah, it was
a lot of other
fun.
parts of the valley. We talk a lot about like kind of an exodus from California and people leaving because, the high cost of living and other things. But, the Central Valley is growing. Bakersfield, even, from when I first moved in 2003, to today. I mean, it's huge and the population and the things to do. But even, not just Bakersfield or Visalia, but Wasco, Shafter, Delano, so many of our communities continue to grow. I think it says a lot about, people who want to raise a family here, who want to make sure that, we continue to have affordable housing. But it's one of the things we come back to, right? Because I remember growing up, we used to always talk about the Central Valley as one of the only places in California where you could still afford to buy a home and live a good quality of life. And that dream and that reality is slipping further and further away because of elected officials who are prioritizing their corporate sponsors instead of our working families, right?
Right. Yeah.
It's incredibly difficult, right? I sometimes joke with my students, and I don't want to date myself, but I ask them like, how old were you guys? What were you doing in 2008, right? And they're like, I was 2 years old, and I was like, well, tough stuff. You
Oh
should have been
my
investing into
God.
real estate, right?
No,
Should have bought a
no.
home.
I reject that.
And but I feel that on a personal
So
level because I was in eighth grade, and right, I couldn't buy a home in 2008.
you were in eighth grade. I graduated high school in 2008.
We couldn't afford to buy a home
Time
either, right?
flies.
Yeah,
Time flies.
yeah.
No,
But
that's really funny. I think it's true. I think downtown is the core of a lot of our cities, our hometowns, and the community of showing up and just inherently caring about how it thrives and how it grows and all of those core things that make a community what it is, that is what actually drives people to want to live there and want to
right.
stay there, right? Whether it's a community event or a really good restaurant or whatever it might be. And Randy, one last question here. How do you feel about Bad Bunny being the halftime performer for next year's Super Bowl?
I love it. I love it. I have, you know, I'm looking forward to it. I love watching football too, but I know so many folks only tune in to the Super Bowl for the halftime show. And I think, he's going to do an amazing job and he's going to represent.
Yeah, and it's gonna be at Levi Stadium in Santa Clara. So, I've been getting, girls like, hey, we could just tailgate. We don't even have to go into the game.
To
We could
listen
just
to it from the
tailgate and
inside.
watch it, like listen to it from outside. We'll be in the vicinity. No, but I really love how Bad Bunny is kind of making a name for Latinos in this country and kind of talking us up and that's really awesome. And
You'll hear folks, on social media talk about this even sometimes too. Like you notice when people, who are in positions of power take a stand. and are public about vocally supporting our communities and standing alongside our communities. And you also notice those who are silent and who don't speak up and who don't show up for our communities. And so, whether we're talking about Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl or whether we're talking about elected officials, I think we need people who are going to show up for our communities, who are going to fight for our communities, who are going to stand up and be vocal because we need fighters in this moment. And so I'm proud to be fighting for the Central Valley. I'm proud to be, standing up alongside the Valley and, working to represent our working families because that's what we need in this moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Randy, thank you so much for joining me. Anything else that maybe you left off that you want to say that we didn't touch on? I feel like we talked about a lot.
Yeah. First off, definitely encourage folks. Many folks are going to get their ballots in the mails in the next coming days, in the next coming weeks. So please make sure you vote yes on Proposition 50. Make sure you fill out your ballot. You can sign your envelope, make sure to sign it, and that it matches your driver's license signature. And you don't have to pay for postage, just drop it off in the mailbox. But more than that, for any of you who want to get tapped into our campaign, please visit randy.vote. You can visit randy.vote/donate, randy.vote/volunteer, or just head over to villegasforcongress.com. Please follow us on socials. We're on, TikTok, Blue Sky, X, Instagram, at Villegas for Congress. So please tap into our campaign, help support us because we need all the help we can get, right? And so excited to continue this work and to continue fighting for the Valley. So thank you so much for having me, Flor, and thank you for using your platform to uplift all our communities. I'm a big fan of many of the guests that you've had on already. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Randy. Yes, if you are able to donate to Randy's campaign, whether you're in the Central Valley or not in the Central Valley, Congressional District 22 is one of the flippable districts that Democrats could win to actually flip the House and stop some of these bills that keep going to the U.S. Senate. Thank you again, Randy. Thank you so much for being here.